What is going on, y'all? Robert Sykes, KetoSavage.com, coming at you with another AMA Ask Me Anything episode. This one is all about total carb count on my macro calculator. So we'll dive into that, but first, let's roll the intro. All right, so today's question is brought to us by Chris, and Chris asks, I've watched many of your YouTube videos and listened to many of your podcasts and respect your approach and lack of dogma when it comes to nutrition. Appreciate it, man. I understand that your ketogenic diet approach is more towards the carnivore side with less vegetables and fiber. The macro calculator caps at 20 grams of carbs. No idea if this is less fiber. Is there a reason for this? Do you find limiting vegetables and fiber in general works to a greater degree for clients and yourself? Or is it just preference? For context, I get about 40 to 50 total grams of carbs, vegetables, nuts, olives, and avocado, with 25 to 30 grams of fiber, and find it enjoyable and works well for me. Thanks for your time and all the content. Great question, Chris. All right, so when you are fat adapted, when you are using fat and ketones as your primary fuel source, I don't really view carbohydrates as performance inducing in that context. Obviously, if you're not fat adapted, if you are incorporating carbohydrates, then that's where you're going to be replenishing your muscle glycogen. That's where you're going to be getting your energy. That's what you're tapping into for fuel. If you're fat adapted, it's not the case. When it comes to body composition, I like controlling for as many variables as possible. When it comes to reducing body fat and you're honing in on everything, you're tracking your macros, you're titrating your calories down, you're just really getting things optimized, I prefer less noise in the equation. If you are not leveraging carbs and glucose for energy, then in the context of a deficit, you want to make the most use of the calories that you do have allotted to work with. So for that reason, I tend to keep total carbs very low. Secondary to that, when you have more carbohydrates, even in the form of fiber, you are going to have more fluctuations in fluid retention. And when calories do get low, I'm not opposed to having fluctuations in fluid retention. That's just part of the day. It happens. But I like to control for that variable as best as possible. So like, for instance, if one day I'm having 10 grams total carbs and the next day I'm having 60 grams of total carbs, then the fluid retention and flux that's going to come as a result of that is going to be much more volatile. When I'm trying to track everything as I'm doing in the context of a prep, I want to remove that variability, especially since I'm not getting any performance benefit from the added carbs. Now, everyone's going to have a different threshold as to where their carb ceiling lies. For instance, based off of my activity level, my amount of lean mass, I could probably consume upwards of 75 grams of total carbs a day and still be in a state of deep ketosis. I don't need that. I don't want that. And I would rather partition those calories towards fats and proteins. Another thing is I would definitely recommend tracking total carbs as opposed to just the net carbs. I don't recommend taking out fiber from the equation altogether from a tracking standpoint. I feel like a lot of companies have gotten really tricky with this. They'll only, highlight the net carb proportion, and a lot of people just don't track the fiber at all. But to think that that's not having an impact from a caloric load standpoint it's just not true. Like yes, you will not be digesting and absorbing some of that, supposed caloric load in fiber, but it's not to say that it's just free. Like, I don't like the idea of there ever being like a free lunch when it comes to anything nutritionally speaking. Like, everything needs to be tracked and accounted for. And if you are tracking total carbs and you're consuming very little total carbs, you're not likely going to have near as much variation and flux in your nutrient quality and density. Also, when it comes to the concept of fiber, many people say you have to have fiber from a digestibility standpoint. I disagree with that as well. Obviously, people that are doing strict carnivore and consuming relatively no or zero fiber don't seem to be having an issue going to the bathroom. So I don't think you have to have fiber to stay regular from a digestive standpoint. Also, fiber can work to minimize the absorption of the foods that you are consuming. This is why a lot of people point to fiber as being, helping with insulin sensitivity and reducing, like when you go to a lot of medical websites, they'll point to fiber as one of the reasons that you can, it's a weight loss thing, have more fiber. A lot of that is because, for one, it's higher volume. So the idea is that if you consume higher volume in fiber, you'll consume less total calories, and that may be true to an extent. However, it also hinders the absorption of some of the calories you are consuming. And in the context of a caloric deficit, as would be the case in a prep or a body recomposition phase, if you've only got so many calories to work with in the first place and you are in an energy deficit, you want to maximize the absorption and assimilation of those nutrients. So the last thing that I want to be doing is consuming more fiber that is going to hinder the absorption of the nutrients that I am getting from my fat and protein. That's where my energy is coming from. It's where my minerals are coming from. I don't want to hinder that absorption. That's another reason I don't personally have very high fiber content when I'm prepping for a show. Now, I totally get, like, on a sustainable day-to-day basis, if you're at maintenance or a surplus, then yeah, feel free to have more fiber, feel free to have more vegetation. Sometimes I get a hankering for a big bowl of Brussels sprouts sauteed in bacon grease. I eat it and I don't feel guilty about it. But I don't typically incorporate that as a variable when I'm trying to get things honed in from a macronutrient standpoint with a specific goal of losing body fat in mind. Not to say you can't have it if your goal is to lose body fat, but I think that just acts as additional noise in the equation that's not really contributing to your overall performance and betterment, so I typically don't do it. Now, from a sustainability standpoint, if you absolutely have to have that to make the diet as a whole more sustainable, by all means do that, because at the end of the day, sustainability is key. Hopefully that answered your question, Chris. I appreciate the question. You requested some cookies and cream crunch keto bricks, so I will send those your way. For anybody that does not know how these AMA videos work, if you submit a well thought out question via the Google form link in the description below and I use your question, I will send you some free keto bricks with a flavor of your choosing. Thanks again. Talk to y'all next time.